Hi there, my name's Ian, and today I'm going to be talking about the relationship between exposure to nature and green spaces and perceived feelings of aggression. So, if I paint a scenario where I ask, how do you feel? Imagine yourself either in a beautiful park or walking through a botanical garden versus being on the sidewalk in a very hustle and bustle city intersection. I'm sure the two scenarios elicit very different emotions and responses. Most people report feeling calmer and an increased sense of personal agency when surrounded by nature. Social psychologists are interested in whether environments like parks and green spaces influence how we behave towards other people. The title of the research article I selected is Passive Green Space Exposure Leading to Lower Aggression: The Mediating Role of Sense of Control. The study explores this idea by asking a simple but interesting question: can simply seeing nature make people less aggressive? I am feeling less aggressive already. More specifically, the researchers in this study tested whether passive exposure to green space, things like seeing trees, grass, or parks, can reduce aggressive behavior by increasing a person's sense of control. The study relates to many topics of social psychology we've discussed this semester, particularly how situational influences and environments shape our thoughts, emotions, and our behavior. The researchers predicted something called a mediating relationship. They believe that green space doesn't just directly reduce aggression, but rather they believe that it works through another psychological factor: sense of control. In other words, exposure to green environments increases our sense of control, which then decreases our perceived sense of aggression or feelings of aggression. The researchers conducted two studies. In the first study, about 240 participants completed surveys in which they were asked to rate three things: how much green space people are exposed to in their daily life, their sense of personal control, and their levels of aggressive tendencies. The second study used a more controlled experimental method in which 260 participants were randomly assigned to view different environments. Some participants saw green natural scenes, while others saw more urban environments. Because participants were randomly assigned, the researchers could better examine cause and effect relationship. The results from both studies showed a similar pattern. People who were exposed to more green environments showed lower levels of aggression and higher levels of sense of control. Statistical analysis of the reports showed that a sense of control acted as a mediator between green space exposure and aggression. In simple terms, nature seems to help people feel more stable and in control, and those feelings make aggressive reactions less likely. This aligns with social psychology research showing that behavior is strongly influenced by situational factors, not just personality traits. So there's a couple limitations to consider. Some of the measures relied on self-reporting and self-monitoring surveys, which means participants might not always describe their behavior perfectly accurately, and thus there are some measurement limitations to consider. The study does implement the use of a Likert scale to help increase the accuracy and validity of their self-reporting. Another consideration is the fact that viewing pictures of nature in a study is not exactly the same as spending time in real natural environments. This limitation, I think, is actually the most interesting. Cultural factors may influence how people respond to green spaces, so the results may not generalize equally across all societies. For example, in Western countries characterized by individualistic values such as the United States, a strong sense of control is often linked to greater happiness and health. By contrast, in collectivist cultures like Japan, the impact of sense of control on these outcomes tends to be less pronounced. The participants from the study were mostly from China, which generally has a more collectivist culture. Given the complexity of these cultural nuances, it is crucial for future research to engage in multi-country studies that cover a broad spectrum of cultural values. And finally, other factors might help explain the effect. For example, green spaces might reduce stress, improve mood, or increased feelings of relaxation, which could also influence aggression. These examples that I've listed could be considered other examples of a mediating relationship, or could be considered qualitative extension of a person's sense of control. So I think more clarification there is important. The most interesting parts of the study is how it applies to real life. If green environments reduce aggression, this could have major implications for urban design and public health. City planners might reduce aggressive behavior by adding more parks, trees, green walking spaces, and other examples of natural areas within cities. This idea connects to social psychology's focus on situational influences on behavior. Instead of trying to change people directly, we can sometimes improve behavior by changing the environments around them. Schools could also benefit from these findings. Increased green spaces around schools might help reduce conflict, stress, and aggressive behavior among students. I think that there's a great potential in studying the relationship between passive exposure to green spaces and the personal and academic wellness of students. Similarly, this could be applied to workplaces. If workplaces apply this research and add natural elements like plants, green spaces, or natural lighting to help employees feel calmer and experience a greater sense of control. Um, just like I mentioned previously, further studies could measure the relationship between passive exposure to green spaces and the productivity and wellness of employees in their workplaces. Um, for individuals, this study suggests something simple but powerful. Spending time around nature might help regulate emotions and reduce stress as a whole. From a social psychology standpoint, this reminds us that our behavior is shaped by the interactions between people and our environments, and something as simple as seeing trees or greenery might influence how we feel and even how we treat other people.